Now that we can populate our list view with the feeds that we've been able to successfully parse, and in this case, just the hard-coded feed that we've grabbed here, but we'll go ahead and modify that in an upcoming lesson. We want to be able to know when we've selected one of our feeds and then transition or segue over to the articles table view controller and present the articles in a very nice way that the user can then click on again. So we're going to do that by scrolling down to the very bottom and utilizing the segue, which we talked about in a previous lesson. So before we can really do that, we should set up our articles table view controller in a similar way that we did with our feeds. So we're going to start off by coming up and we're going to create a property here at the top that's going to contain an array of articles, and this array of articles is actually going to get populated through the segue process that we're going to do when we actually notice that there's somebody clicking on or tapping on one of the feeds. So we're going to create an articles array that's going to be used when we're actually doing all of the UI table view stuff, similarly to how we did previously for the feeds. So we're going to specify that there's only going to be one section here, just like we did before. And then the number of rows in this section is going to be equal to articles.count again. So we're going to return that. And then once again, we need to implement our cell for row at index path again. Now this is going to be similar to the process we did for the feeds, but ever so slightly different. So we'll go ahead and head back over to our storyboard. And this time we're going to come over here to our articles and we'll go ahead and select this prototype. Once again, we need to specify a reuse identifier. So we'll call this an article cell. But do notice that there's a slight difference here in that for the feeds, we're only showing the title, but for articles, we can show both the title and a subtitle, so we can put two pieces of data on that particular cell. So that's what we're going to utilize. So let's come back to our articles view controller here. Once again, we are dequeuing a reusable cell with an identifier, which we have to specify here. So we're going to say this is an article cell, just like we specified within our storyboard. So now we have that cell to access, but we need to get the corresponding article that is showing up in the table view. So we can do that by grabbing the appropriate article. So we'll make this a constant. So we'll say we want to grab an article model and we're going to initialize it to articles. And then we're going to grab once again the index path.row so we can get that associated article for the particular row that's showing up on the screen. In this case, the one that shows up at that particular index path. So once we have that, we can now say that the cell, and once again, we're going to grab the text label, and remember that this is an optional, just like we saw on the feed, so we're going to have to actually use the exclamation point to say, give me the text label so I can get access to the text property, and then set that to the article title. So that should take care of that. And then we're going to specify that. So when we use the particular type of prototype that we're using for this cell, we have a text label as well as a detail text label. So I can play with both of these and set both of their text. And in this case, we're just going to stick down at the bottom here the pub date so we can see when this particular article was actually published. And then we'll return the cell and we'll just move on. So that should be enough for this, but now we actually have to populate the articles array here. So how are we going to do that? Well, once again, we're going to head back to our feeds table view controller, and we can do our segue magic here like we talked about in a previous lesson. So we're going to get rid of these comments. So once again, a best practice here would say that I should come over here and I should select this particular segue and make sure that I'm using this particular identifier and check for it. Because remember, we could have multiple segues with multiple identifiers here. We only want to do this particular operation when our identifier is equal to show articles. So just to make sure we're kind of using that as a pattern here, we'll go ahead and make sure we'll check to see if our segue.identifier, so we'll check that property is equal to show articles. And if that is truly the case, then we're going to we're going to go ahead and grab an instance of our view controller. So we'll say view controller, and this is actually going to be an instance of an articles table view controller. We're going to initialize that to our segue. Now this is our destination, remember, so we want to get our destination view controller, but in this case we're going to have to cast it because it's just going to be a UI view controller, so it's not going to know about our articles property on the articles table view controller. So that's the reason we have to actually cast that to another type. So once we've done that, we need to figure out which one of our feeds has been selected. Now in our case, we only have one at this particular time, but we're going to be able to add functionality and to add more than just this one. So let's just assume that there could be multiple feed models within this array. So when we were doing the selection bit on here for the cell for row at index path, we have this index path here, so we know which one was actually selected. But how do we do that when we're talking about a selection within a segue? Well, there's another helper method that we can use. So we're going to kind of fake this a little bit. We're going to create an index path. And the way that we're going to do that is because we are a UI table view controller, we can reference ourself and we can go into our table view property and we can use a method called index path for selected row. And this is going to give us an index path for the particular row that was selected. And once again, this is going to provide or return an optional, so I need to make sure that I'm getting the actual index path. So now that I have that, I can now get the feed that I have selected. So I can go ahead and look into feeds and use my index path.row. So now I have the feed, and now I simply need to take that view controller and I need to set its articles property equal to feed.articles. We'll go ahead and save that. Now, we have now tapped into being able to select a feed. Once we've done that, we check to make sure that we are working with the appropriate segue. And if we are, we're going to grab that destination view controller, which happens to be an articles table view controller. Then we're going to get which of the rows within our table view was selected. We're going to get the appropriate feed for that particular row. And then we're going to set the destination view controller, that articles table view controller property of articles that we just created over here on this guy right here. And we're going to set it to the articles associated with that feed. So now, once we get over here, we should be populating all the cells with all the articles that were there. So we'll go ahead and save this and build just to make sure we haven't fat fingered anything. Now if I run this, once our simulator pops up, we should once again see here we've parsed it again, news and updates Apple developer. And if I tap on this guy, we can now see all the feeds associated with that RSS. We can see all the articles associated with that RSS feed populated within articles. Now the next step will finally be to say if I tap on one of these, I should come over and be able to see what's happening or actually see that actual article within that web view so I can read the full article.